Good morning, dear brothers and sisters, and dear visitors, and welcome in the headquarters of the General Conference. We would like to study together our Sabbath school lesson for this Sabbath. It's May 19, 2012, and we have incredible topic, very important for all of us and for the last time which we're living in. We would like to begin with a silent prayer. Join us, please, in a silent prayer. Amen. The lesson connects or make a relationship with the previous lesson that have to do with the leadership of Moses, and it speaks about Israel and Laodicea. It is a very interesting comparison, because if we compare the literal Israel and Laodicea, it is a specific period of time. This kind of comparison is very interesting and can bring us to many different thoughts. We would like to read the introduction testimonies and Evangelism, page 696. We may have to remain here in this world because of insubordination many more years, as did the children of Israel. But for Christ's sake, His people should not add sin to sin by charging God with consequences of their own wrong course of action. Actually, this testimony is a continuation of the text where Sister White mentioned that we are late in time. The latter rain was supposed to come in 1888, and the end of the world was supposed to come also soon after that. The Sunday law and all other events were ready to develop, just waiting for the action of the people of God. But that's what the testimony says. We are late. We have to stay more years here. That's make actually impossible to calculate the time of the second coming of Christ. We know that we live in the last time, the time of judgment, and that's all what we can say. It is sad that really this happened, and we live in such condition and in such a situation. But we would like to go to the first question. And the first undertitle is about the belief. When we talk about Israel and Laodicea, we need to understand that we speak about the literal but also the spiritual Israel. We would like to see the parallels between the spiritual and the literal Israel, and how did that affect the last period of the Church of God, which is Laodicea. What was built under God's guidance to be the center of worship in Israel? What was the center of worship in the literal Israel, and what is supposed to be the center of worship in the spiritual Israel?
In Exodus, we find the people of God near to Mountain Sinai, and Moses received a command from the Lord that he wished to dwell with his people. And that was the main purpose to build a sanctuary. And the Lord not only gave the command to Moses, but was also extended to the people of Israel, to the people of God at this time, because they need to provide everything that was needed. But the main purpose of it was that God will be among, or dwell among his people. And the second main element that also God especially emphasized in this command to Moses was that need to be exactly according to the same pattern that he have revealed to him that is in heaven. So if we consider these two main elements, we can easily come to the conclusion that the sanctuary was representation of the plan of salvation, and is made in such a way that is touchable for the people, can be understood, and can be real in front of them. But at the same time, it's also a reproduction of the process that is going on in heaven. So the sanctuary not only reveals God with men, but also the ministry that God is doing for his people, and we need to follow the same pattern.
Very interesting. The Bible verse says in Exodus chapter 25, verse 9, "And let them make me a sanctuary." We know that that's happened literally. The sanctuary was built up, and that was the presence of God come in. That was the place where people went to talk to God. The high priest went there, present sacrifices. All the details I think we know. But my questions will be, if Solomon built the sanctuary, built the temple, literally in the Old Testament, or in time of Moses they built the tabernacle, how do the Seventh-day Adventists build that? Because that is actually the reference to the fulfillment of this prophecy and the beginning of the Advent movement.
Yes, I think this element is very important to consider the connection between the title of our lesson, that is Israel and Laodicea. So we see that with the end of the 1,260 years, 1698 began also a rediscovering of the Holy Scriptures.
So in the Old Testament was built in stones and material, and in 1844 was the restore of the teaching of the sanctuary, right?
Was rediscovered through the prophecy of Daniel 8:14. And because began the time of the end, according to the prophecy that I already mentioned from 1,260 years, was come to the light, and through the inspiration of God to William Miller, also the understanding of the sanctuary, not in a completely perspective, but at least enough to alarm the people and to realize the relationship between the first coming of Christ in the sanctuary and the second coming of Christ in the sanctuary are very near connected.
Mm-hmm. We need to understand that the Old Testament speaks about the sanctuary on earth. The New Testament speaks already about sanctuary in heaven. The high priest in the Old Testament was on earth. In the New Testament, we have the high priest in heaven. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 1 says that. This is why when in our time, we don't need to wait that the sanctuary is built up in Jerusalem physically, although so many movements, even Christian movements, are hoping and waiting and praying for that. But we know that this sanctuary already exists, and what we need to do is only follow the high priest in the most holy place by faith. And that is what was discovered through the doctrine of the Seventh-day Adventists when they were enlightened by the Spirit, and they could see why this mistake was taking place and what was to be considered. So literal Israel, spiritual Israel, the real sanctuary and the heavenly spiritual sanctuary that we need to build in ourselves. All these things go parallelly, and it's very interesting. Now, what else was needed to be restored. One thing was the doctrine, the sanctuary doctrine, the right place of worship, the right understanding of the truth was restored, and with the spiritual Israel. And what happened with the organization? If we go to the second question now, something else was given to the literal Israel that the spiritual Israel didn't really know what to do with. And the time comes that this also was revealed. What kind of advice received Moses, and how did that reflect in the Advent movement?
Yeah, we have two main moments in the Old Testament. One is in Exodus 18, the other one in Numbers 11. In Exodus 18, we find Moses judging the people of God, and everyone is coming to him looking for a solution of different problems. And then his father-in-law observed this situation, and Moses was sitting early in the morning until very late in the evening. And that was really very difficult to extend during the time. So Jethro was inspired by God and gave a very wise counsel to Moses and say, choose people and distribute it then among the people of God so that they can help you and they can solve minor problems, so that only the most grievous and more important subjects that they are not able to solve, they can bring it to you. So then we find here the first main organizational structure, but we need to remember that was already a structure because they were the representatives of the tribes. And when Moses went back to Egypt, God gave him the command to present himself in front of the elders from the tribes. Now, this is an administrative organization divided in groups according to numbers. And then in Numbers 11, we find another situation that Moses was so sad that he said to the Lord, I cannot bear this anymore. Please take my life. So Moses went so far that he was not able to go on with this situation, especially because the people was very difficult. Now the Lord gave another extension of the organizational structure, and then the Lord said, choose 70 elders among the wise and prudent persons, representatives from families and tribes, among all the people of God. So I think we have different elements that are important to consider here. First, that organization is a flexible element in the structure of the Church of God.
Depending on the needs.
Correct,
that people
correct.
have.
So
right.
this means that can be adapted according to the situation, because the Lord don't establish the organization since the beginning. When they went out, was always adapted according to the situation. Now, when Moses expressed himself and say, I cannot bear this anymore, I don't like even to live, so the Lord say, please, let us do something. But a very important element that was very impressive for me is that God says, bring these 70 people to the sanctuary. And then I will take from the spirit that I have given to you, and I will transfer to them. And the Bible text say that immediately they began to prophesy also. So God, the doctrine, the plan of salvation, the beliefs of the people of God. These are the foundation. This cannot be changed. This cannot be adapted. But all the other elements go around it.
There is some question I have here in some places, not so much in our church, but in some movements that are against organization. They say the father-in-law of Moses, he was a pagan man, they say, and how could that be that he gives such advices, and that this advice about organization was not according to God? Who was this man? Was he a pagan man, the father-in-law of Moses? That could be enlightened. I think it's a good contribution for our people.
Yes, I think it's very fascinating when you open your Bible and find a lot of chapters related with genealogies and related with descendants. So when we study the identity or try to discover the identity of Jethro in the Old Testament, we can be amazed to confirm that he is a descendant of one of the sons of Abraham. Because after the death of Sarah, Abraham married again and married Keturah. And Keturah gave to him different sons that become prince. And the Lord gave the command to Abraham that they give a portion of his wealth to them, but they needed to send them away so that only Isaac will remain there. So Jethro, that in the Bible is described as the priest of the Almighty. Okay? So he was practicing the right religion, teach by Abraham to his descendants. So he was
not a pagan man.
Absolutely
no
not.
Way.
Yes.
So very important clarification. Yes. Organization was given by God. The advice was given by the people of God, by one of the priests of the Most High, and was also confirmed by the Spirit of God, because we mentioned that these selected elders, they received the Spirit of God, and God don't do mistakes in that direction. So the organization was a blessing of God, and that is what happened also in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Although several of the brethren were scared to organize and fearing that the organization can limit their action and understanding of truth, but God is God of order, and he brings the proper light. The same as the literal Israel was organized and have their focus in the sanctuary, the very same way the spiritual Israel have to be organized and focus their doctrine and worship in the heavenly sanctuary. In the third question says, what do we notice in comparing the organizational level of the local church field, conference and unions with organizational structure established in Moses' time? I think we will come to the numbers now, 10, hundreds, and we have a very similar structure actually. We consider a church that is already or field that can send delegates to a general conference. They have 10 members, which is a biblical position. We do not consider so much the hundreds, but we do consider for example, the possibility of existence of a union if they have sufficient members. So the same structure of 10, hundreds, and thousands reflects this three level of organization, reflects even in our days in our church. We have churches, we have fields, we have unions, and we have the general conference which supervised the whole. In the Seventh-day Adventist Church, when the people grow, the number of members grow, also divisions were introduced, and as an extension of the General Conference leadership. And this is not our case, because we survive in the situation which we are. But these are the forms of organization which we have. We would like to see in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 33, it says, "For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all churches of the saints." We need to understand that the organization is not to be compared, or the form of organization is not to be compared as and the importance of the law of God is flexible. We could see how in the time of Moses the organization was adapted according to the needs of people and the church, and so is and so will be also in our time and until the time of end. The organization will change forms and will adapt the form which is necessary, which is the best for the circumstances, for the financial possibilities, for to serve to the people and to build up their spirituality. We would like to see a question number 4. What great privilege did the people of Israel have, and what privilege do God's people have today? Let's see now the spiritual advantages that the old Israel, or the literal Israel, and the spiritual Israel have. What do you say, Raquel?
I wish to add something to question number 3, especially
yes,
with the parallel between the Old Testament in our present time. It is important to consider that first, after 15 years after the disappointment in 1844, they organized somehow a very primary way of organization, because these first 15 years they were without any formal organization, the Adventists, after the disappointment. So we find first in 1861 the first conference, the first Michigan Conference was the first mission field that was organized as such.
But before the Second Advent, the Millerites, they do use kind of organization, and therefore come the name General Conference.
Correct.
Because they gather every year in a conference where they discuss spiritual issues, doctrinal issues, and in these conferences they elected also a committee, a correspondence committee they call, and that was the General Conference that was coordinating the whole things of circulation of truth, the distribution of leaflets, publications, and everything. In the Second Advent, after they have been disfellowshipped from the churches, a big disappointment comes from organization, because the organization was used by the Protestant churches to chase away the faithful ones, and that makes that the brethren were so scared of organization and took this kind of stand. But then come 1961, yeah.
So in 1861 is the first.
1861, I'm sorry.
Yeah, is the first time that we find an organized conference, and that was Michigan Conference. Very soon after this, already in 1962, we found already a couple of them organized. But it's in 1863 the first time that delegates are sent to a general conference as representatives of these conferences. So by this time, in 1863, when it's also chosen the official name, Seventh-day Adventist, we have already 3 main levels of organization. We have the local churches, then we have the conferences, and then we have the general conference. So we find that this first level of organization was also reduced to the territory that they were at this time. And we see that they expand the organization in the same way as also the population moved west of the country. And then this expansion westward that was between 1860 until 1880 was in the process of this migration of people, also the organization of different conferences at the same time. And then we find the first foreign missionary society in 1869, because until this time they were very much focused in the local territory, in the boundaries of the north section. And first in 1874 is when Andrews is sent as the official missionary from the General Conference. But we know that we are even before different interesting souls in Europe and other countries. And officially also in 1885, also a special group of missionaries were sent to Australia. So we see that the organization is not a moment level of administration, but is a progressive and is a expanded process that become a reality according to the need.
Very interesting. Yeah, there are a lot to talk about the organization. Maybe we can say, okay, Moses and Aaron, the leaders, were elected directly by God, and we have elections in our church. Some people have asked me these questions when I do a reorganization in the unions. We believe that in our church, God chooses the leaders. It looks like or sounds a little bit too proud, maybe, but that's how we believe. We believe that through the vote of the delegates, God reflects his opinion. In the Old Testament, we see that there was a special way of casting a vote, a casting of, how is that? A lot, casting a lot to show who of the priest will serve in the temple. And that is how they believe God also appointed the priest that is supposed to serve. In our situation, the election is not based on superstition, not based on some kind of miracle, but it's based on the revelation of fruits of the Spirit which we have in our lives. And if we have 5 people, we need to judge according to the fruits, according to the light that we have. And that's how God selects the people. It's not really a democracy, as many people say. We do elections, democratic election. It is, we believe, through the votes of delegates, God expresses his will and guides his church. Let's go to the next point about the spiritual advantages that the people of God have in the literal Israel and the ones that we have in the spiritual today.
I was very much impressed with the parallel Bible texts presented here, especially because Exodus 19 is the previous chapter before we find the written form of the Ten Commandments. So the Lord announced to his people that they need to sanctify themselves because God will reveal himself, and also they will hear the voice of God and the Ten Commandments. Now, it's very interesting that the people of God at this time was afraid and said to Moses, go, you need to go up to the mountain, and then you can explain to us what is going on, but we are afraid to do it. So the Lord wanted that his people have a brighter and more closer understanding of himself. Now, they rejected to do so. Now, when we go to Revelation chapter 3, the Lord used a very interesting way of expressing himself and say, I am at the door and knock. If somebody hear my voice. So we see here a very interesting contrast. So God wanted to express himself and that his people hear his voice. And the same message is now for Laodicea time. This means for every one of us. So the two main characteristics was that you are a real priesthood. You are a selected generation. You are a holy nation. But why? And why this happened? The Bible text also presented us to this, because was saying to Israel from the old time, and he's saying now to the present Israel, and the purpose is to announce the gospel to other people. So these characteristics that we find that the people of God needed to hear, needed to confirm the covenant, and then they will become this special treasure. And they will be this real priesthood that not only will serve God, but will serve others and will present the real God and the true God and the true religion to the world.
Very important. We need to understand that in the time of Moses, the Mosaic system of leadership and the leadership today in our church have many parallels, almost the same in the basic principle. One of the principles here is that every one of the people of God have the possibility to hear the voice of God. And that was the idea with God. So God wanted that all the people go and see him and he can talk direct to them. But in the old Israel, they didn't want it, as Raquel just mentioned. And today, that's happened the same. God's offered the possibility that everyone personally appear to God, hear his voice, talk to him, and have a directly personal communication. That's happened only through the favors of Jesus Christ. Such a great privilege, such a blessing, an advantage that we have. This is why many times we find the word democracy in our organization from Greek demo, which means equal, because we believe that the true organization of God, everybody is equal in rights. We don't have kings, we don't have nobles, which means that the king is transmitting his kingly power by descendants, a family line, biological line. No way. We believe that the Spirit of God is selecting, and each one of the members have the same rights in the church and in the front of God. This is why it's used the word democracy, but we're not really a democratic society. We are supposed to be theocratic society, a society guided by the voice of God, not just because the leaders are guided by the voice of God and everybody else follow, but everyone have to be followed by this voice, and this voice is bringing the church really nicely together. We would like to see in questions number 5, time is running very fast, about the disappointments. Due to their weak spiritual condition, what great disappointments did Israel have to face? And a similar disappointment was faced by the Adventist people.
Yeah, in Numbers 13 we find the problem with the spies that were sent to Canaan after approximately 2 years after leaving. Since they leave Egypt, they are now in the border of Canaan. So they sent 12 spies, one for every tribe, and then came back with fruits, with tokens of the country, of Canaan, but also with oral reports. And then this was the problem. So we find that 10 of the spies, they gave a report in such a way that the people become to weep and to cry in front of their tents. So the other 2 spies explained to them that is a very powerful country, that it's true that they are giants. It's true that they are fortifications and fortresses. But they say, if God is with us and he has promised to us that we are going to inherit this, he will give us. And that was the most important element. They don't believe that this will happen. And as a result of this came then the other element that we find in number 16, that was a rebellion. That is the rebellion of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Because the people say to Moses, you have brought us here only that we die. Because now we went through all the desert, approximately 2 years. Now we are here and then we cannot come in. So what made this for a sense? So we came here only that we die. So they say, let us choose a leader that he bring us back to Egypt. And they were even near to stone Moses. So rebellion, so that was a rejection of the leadership that God have chosen, but always this rebellion is related with a rejection of also of the authority of God, because God say, you will have the land. I have promised to you. You will have it. Now, when the Lord say, okay, you don't want to go? Okay, don't go. Then they say, we want to go. And they lose. So we see here this interesting parallel. Organization, rejection of the authority of God, and rejection of the authority of the chosen people of God. And obviously came a reaction for this.
The lack of faith is in the beginning of every fall, and that was the case. I guess Moses sent the spies to oversee the land, hoping they will come with a good report, bringing the report of the wonderful fruits, these wonderful fields, and they brought the fruits of that land. And he was expecting that will encourage the people to be more motivated to go. But the spies, as you mentioned, did not bring only good reports, they bring the bad reports. And that, of course, brought these consequences. Now, how do we see this parallel with our church today? Do we have only good reports, or we have only bad reports? Also bad reports many times. We do face bad reports as well, and do face murmuring as well. We do face doubt in the leadership as well. And it's interesting that in the case of Moses, Moses was not a perfect man. Aaron was not a perfect man. And a lot of mistakes have been committed. Aaron even permitted the people to build up the golden calf, and we know what happened. So far away from perfection, but God have chosen them. The people of God were supposed to keep certain order. And if they have confidence to God, they will accept the leadership. But when there is no confidence in God, there is also doubt in the leadership. And that's so sad that rejecting the people actually they turns up to rejecting God. And similar way in Adventist movement, also in the beginning, a tremendous disappointment take place, doubts, and from so many followers remain only very few. A lot of people abandoned the movement. They were so discouraged. And that's what happened frequently in our time. In churches, in fields, in unions, at general conference, certain points of disappointments can face us. And then the trial is there, and God will test us, test our faith, test our fidelity to God and to His Word. But because of these trials and tests, or we can say God used these trials and these tests to purify His church. So it is not against His will that difficulties comes in our spiritual life and in the church. This is why the Word of God speaks about remnant. Always when there is disappointment, when there is drop down of membership, when there is problem, people leave the church, there is a rebellion, as we have in 1951, and people left the church, divisions in the church, tremendous disaster. But what takes place? God have a remnant. So how this remnant was reflected in the literal Israel and also in the spiritual Israel today.
Okay, when the Lord pronounced the prophecy that they say, for every day that the spies were in the promised land, for every day you will wander 1 year through the wilderness. So was giving a prophecy and was saying to them, all this generation will perish in the wilderness with the exceptions of 2 persons. That was the remnant of this generation. Because they say, Moses have brought us only that we die together with our children. And God says, okay, because you say that you and your children will die here, you will die, but not your children. So your children will be the one that will receive the promised land because you rejected. And it's very interesting how the Bible presents this remnant from the faithful ones of this first generation and say they have another spirit. So they were realistic. So they realized that is a country that in a normal way of thinking was impossible that the people of God conquer. But they say, the Lord will be with us, so we are going to do it. The Lord has promised He will give it to us. And the problem in 1844 was also that the people rejected completely the scriptures. And they say, all this prophecy from the 2,300 evening mornings, this is completely wrong. All that was preaching, everything that was said, was not true. And that was a mistake, because that was true. It was only one problem. That is what will happen after this prophecy came to fulfillment. And the ones that have another spirit and say, no, the problem is not in the scriptures. The problem is in our own interpretation of things. And they ask for wisdom. They plead the Lord for wisdom. The Lord showed them.
So the remnant is described here as the people that have the Spirit of God, the people who are humble, the people who don't overestimate themselves, the people that always look for God and the purity, and the people that are not scared from the trials, and they are not discouraged in their faith. But all the trials and problems, they still remain faithful in their faith. It's interesting that a generation have to go through so that the next generation enter in the Canaan, in the promised land. And Sister White prophesied actually in her time that since in 1888 the light was not accepted, then this generation, we have to stay so many more years on this earth, she says. It's another generation that have to take care of the events, or will participate of the events of the last days. And the next generation, actually another 40 years approximately after 1888, is when the Reform movement comes up. And it is very interesting to see this parallel, how the next generation practically form up a remnant that stand fast on the principles of God and the principles of the sanctuary. The last question in our lesson: what process have the church of the seventh period gone through, and what lies ahead? What great consolation is for believers today?
In Hebrew 12, 25 and 26, we find a parallel between the word of God that was revealed to the people of Israel in the Old Testament, and says, be careful not to reject the one who speaks. So they promised to keep the covenant several times. And they say, we will do it. And that was the first mistake already, because we can never do this with our own strength. Now, here the parallel for us is also with Haggai 2, 6 and 7, that is related with the restoration of the people of God after the 70 years of the Babylonian captivity, and also the rebuilding of the temple, and the first coming of Christ. Now, for us, we have the responsibility to present the truth and to restore the old paths and to present the second coming of Christ in the same way. So that may the Lord help us not to put aside the one that speaks to us. This is the admonition that we find in Hebrew 12.
We would like to see also in Haggai chapter 2, verse 6, for this says the Lord of hosts, yet once is the little while, and I will shake the heavens and earth, and the sea and a dry land. It's just a little while, shall we say, the prophet. In the expectation of the prophets always exists this little while. The prophet sees the end of the world so near, the coming of Christ so close, so near. They see it. That will happen in our lives. That was also the expectation of our pioneers or the reformers. They were preaching, come, Christ will come. Now we are the last of the last, and it's the remnant, and Christ is coming. And it's such a great expectation. And we need to understand that this is how the people of God sees it. And this is how that's happened in the Old Testament, in the literal Israel. They were hoping that they will enter in the promised land immediately, and God will bring them the promised land very soon, in 40 days. But because of the unbelief, because of the disobedience, the murmuring, the lack of faith, they have to stay much, much longer and not even enter in the promised land. And that's, unfortunately, our situation. Many times we push the coming of Christ to the future and say, oh, there is time. Sunday law doesn't come yet, so we have to wait. But actually, the one that waits for us is the Lord waits, that we be prepared, that we accept the message, that we focus on the spiritual life. And when the people of God are ready, then everything else will quickly come to the end. And we are late already in time, which is such unfortunate situation. But we need to understand that we have nothing to fear about and not to be discouraged. Dear brother and dear sister, don't be discouraged. Go forward. Any moment you can address your prayer to Jesus Christ and He can hear you. He can enter in your life and guides you. The church of God, it's it's guided by God. The church of God, the remnant of God, are those who hear the voice of God and follow him. This is the right unity. This is the right center of the organization. This is the real spiritual life and experience. May God bless you. Amen.
Amen.